Well, let's talk about this the way that civilized people would talk about it. Not the way it's talked about in the American media or the Western media. Let's talk about it the way civilized people would talk about it. Objectively, factually, and legally. Rule of law is a concept that comes from Islam. It comes from Islam. Keeping agreements, keeping treaties, and so forth. This is from Islam. If you are bound by a contract, you're bound by an agreement or a treaty or what have you, you keep that. You fulfill it. You understand? And we have all agreed to a set of laws, to a set of rules that are supposed to govern international relations. Supposed to. There are institutions that we have all agreed to accept as the arbiters and as the enforcer of these rules that we all agreed to. There's nothing subjective about this. This is all written down. It's all written down on paper. It's all signed off on. And those who violate the rules, this is not a matter of opinion. This is a matter of legal non-compliance. It's a violation of terms. It's a violation of conditions, and it's a violation of what's been written down. And the violation is very clear because the terms are very clear. There's no room for debate. There's no room for interpretation. No one needs to take an opinion poll. So let's start there, because if you're going to talk about Iran and you're not going to talk about the law, then we already know from the outstart that whatever you have to say about Iran, you have no legal leg to stand on with what you're going to say. That's what most of the talk has been like about Iran. You know, Iran is this, Iran is that. They oppress people, they suppress their protesters and whatnot. They want to have nuclear weapons, so we need regime change, so on and so forth. Many people in the country want regime change and so on. None of that means anything whatsoever if you have no legal grounds for what you are doing. Even if the population of Iran was cheering for when your missiles come and blow up their schools, even if the people of Iran wanted you to come in there and overthrow their government, that means nothing. You still can't do it because you have to follow the rules. That's the way it's supposed to work. So obviously, the American-Israeli war against Iran is completely illegal. It's completely illegal. It's not just a crime, it's a series of ongoing crimes, war crimes that are going on right now today. The United Nations Charter, Article 2, Section 4, has the most fundamental rule of international order that we have. The most fundamental rule of the international order that we have. The order, by the way, that America set up in the first place because they thought they were never going to be held accountable to it. And that is the prohibition of any use of force against any sovereign state, full stop. There are exactly two exceptions to this rule. One is that you get the Security Council to authorize it, which they did not do in this case. That didn't happen. Or number two, that you are acting in genuine self-defense against an actual armed attack that has occurred. Iran did not attack them. They were literally in negotiations with them at the time. That should make any honest person, that should make your blood boil, knowing that Iran was sitting across the negotiating table from the American diplomats when the missiles were already sent up in the air to hit Tehran. The foreign minister of Oman was mediating those talks, and he said publicly, I said this before, he said publicly, just hours before the first strike, that Iran had formally agreed to never adopt or to never develop nuclear weapons. Hours before, just hours before, they started bombing Iran. They started their war. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism said it very plainly. He said, this is not self-defense. What the Americans are doing, what the Israelis are doing, it's not self-defense. The Security Council did not authorize it. Preventive disarmament, regime change, counterterrorism, preemptive attack, these are not legal categories for the use of force in international law. Those are international crimes of aggression. That's what those are. That's the legal term. It's a crime of aggression. That's what the U.S. did. America's own intelligence chief, he testified just months before this war that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon. They were not pursuing even a nuclear weapon. America's own people said that. Their own people told them that under oath. And then Trump got up and used the nuclear threat, so-called, as his justification for starting a war. Or else he said it was because he believed that Iran was about to attack them. He said Iran was about to attack us, or they were about to attack Israel. Again, this is not a legal justification. Not at all. Legal scholars have already called it exactly what it is. I can quote you, scattershot rationales. None of them amount to anything close to an international legal argument. That's not me saying that. That's not Shahid Bolsen saying that. That's not even a critic of the United States saying that. That's the International Crisis Group saying that. And then beyond the question of whether or not they had a right to start their war, they didn't, but whether or not they had a right to do it, then there's the question of how they're fighting it. A girls' school hit with a Tomahawk missile, at least 185 people killed, mostly children. That's not collateral damage, that's a war crime. That's a war crime, according to the UN Charter, according to the rules that you signed up on, the rules that you wrote yourself. Since February 28th, over at least 1,400 Iranian civilians have been killed and 18,000 injured. You're talking about healthcare workers, physicians, nurses, doctors, teachers, mothers and fathers and children dead. Almost 100 killed per day and 1,000 injured per day without legal justification of any kind whatsoever and without provocation. A terror campaign, as Pete Hegseth himself said, a terror campaign of death and destruction rained down from the sky, launched in the middle of negotiations. That's savage and barbaric, and it's criminal by every civilized standard. That's the law. And that's what happened. That's what they've done. That's what they are doing. But let's not just talk about the current war, because the current war doesn't come from nowhere. It's not happening out of in a void. You understand? It comes from almost a century of lawlessness by the United States towards Iran that they never face consequences for. And I'm just talking about the U.S. and Iran, just the U.S. and Iran. Because if I'm talking about the U.S. and everyone else, my goodness, their criminal record is endless. Go back to 1953. Everyone already knows this. America and the UK orchestrated a coup against Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. He wasn't a communist. He wasn't a threat to anyone. He wasn't a threat to anyone, except that he nationalized Iranian oil. Oil that belonged to the Iranian people. It belongs to the Iranian nation. And for that, the Western democratic crusaders toppled Iran's democracy. And they installed a very ruthless, very vicious dictator, the Shah, whose son is right now dreaming that he's going to be installed himself over Iran. Okay? Illegal. The revolution of 1979 was not a spontaneous eruption of fanaticism in Iran. It was blowback. American made, yes. Every single issue with Iran goes back to that. Goes back to that. And you're still so delusional that you think that you can portray that miserable period under the Shah with nostalgia, with his savak, with his security police, his secret police, and his torture chambers. And now his quizzling son is wanting to reenact his father's American-backed dictatorship over Iran. And then you have the Iran-Iraq war, when America knew that Saddam Hussein was using chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers. He was using chemical weapons against them and against Kurdish civilians. America provided those weapons, those chemicals, and they provided the intelligence, they provided the satellite imagery, and they helped him to do it. They helped him to do it more effectively and more efficiently. 1 million people died in that war, 1 million. 1 million people. And America sat at the table with Saddam when he was their good friend. He was their good friend at that time until they decided to go after him next. They went after Saddam too. Mad dogs that they are. Okay? Illegal. All of this is illegal. None of this is allowed under international law. And then there was Stuxnet, which was a joint American-Israeli cyber attack against Iran's nuclear infrastructure. You think that's nothing. That's an act of sabotage. That's an act of war. It's conducted without any declaration of war. It's conducted without any authorization for war, without any legal basis whatsoever, completely illegal under every framework of international law. But it happened, and nothing happened to them for doing it. No recriminations, no consequences. And then you have the assassinations, the endless assassinations. The Israeli Mossad, which is just a wing of the American security services, year after year, killing Iranian nuclear scientists on Iranian soil. We're talking about civilian scientists, not soldiers, not commanders, not military people, civilian scientists. Just normal men who went to work in the morning and never came home because they possessed knowledge. That's murder. That's nothing but murder. That's state-sponsored murder, targeted killing of civilians. And the world watched it happen, and the world pretended like it was justified because everyone has accepted America's designation of Iran as uniquely unfit to have a nuclear program. Meanwhile, America is the only country in history to ever actually use atomic weapons against anyone, twice. Something that they have never been held accountable for. They've never been held accountable for it. They've never apologized for it. They've never even admitted that it was a war crime. They never even admitted that it's a crime against humanity or a crime of any kind. They don't even think it's a misdemeanor. Oh yes, America's crimes against Iran have been going on for a very long time. It's been going on for a very long time. Now to bring it up to recent history, in 2024, Israel bombed the Iranian consulate in Damascus. That's a diplomatic facility protected under the Vienna Conventions, one of the oldest and most fundamental frameworks of international law that we're supposedly all in agreement on. The consulate is Iranian sovereign territory. If you bomb that consulate, you bomb Iran. And they did it. And nothing happened. Completely illegal, and nothing happened, no consequences. by the international order, so-called. No one cares. Because you're able to get around the law by means of your narrative. Once you designate someone, whether it's a nation, whether it's a people, whether it's an ethnicity, whether it's a government, or whether it's an individual, as evil or villainous or an enemy or what have you, for you, they have no legal rights. They have no legal protections. And you are no longer required to follow the law or obey the law with regards to them. You understand? I haven't even said anything about the decades upon decades of sanctions against Iran imposed unilaterally by the United States that blocked Iran's access to medicine, to food, to critical infrastructure, to development. That's collective punishment. That's what that is. That's what unilateral sanctions are. Nothing but collective punishment. That's the legal term. And it's against the law. Collective punishment is against the law. It means the collective punishment of a civilian population. That's prohibited under international humanitarian law. Again, something we're all supposed to be agreed upon. But when America does it, they get to call it just political pressure. The slow economic strangulation of 90 million people, that's just political pressure. No, it's illegal. It's aggression. It's a crime. What do you think, that as long as you're not actively massacring people, that's about as nice as we can expect you to be? Subhanallah. Like suffocating someone is humane, and at least you're not carpet bombing them. We should be grateful for that. No, there's not grades of illegality. There's legal and illegal. So when I say that we condemn this war, understand the weight of what we are condemning. We're not just condemning a single military operation. We're condemning almost a century, almost 100 years of impunity for the United States in their treatment of Iran. We're talking about a system that overthrows governments. We're talking about a system that kills children in their own schools, a system that bombs consulates, that collectively punishes an entire population. We're talking about a system that starts a war during active negotiations and calls that somehow self-defense. Now, I've provided extensive analysis in several other videos about what I think are the geopolitical machinations that are going on, that are involved in what's going on. But none of that changes the fact, understand me, none of that changes the fact that this entire conflict is illegal. So we see it as it is, and we call it as it is. And we condemn it as it is, without qualification, without hesitation, without equivocation. But like I've said many times, our job as Muslims is to be witnesses, So the same way that we will tell the truth about this, about America's criminality, factually and objectively, we have to talk that same way about Iran too. Because here's where a lot of people don't want to go when you talk about Iran, because Iran is being wronged by the United States. Yes, they are. And they have been wronged by the United States, like I say, for almost 100 years. So now you want to gloss over some of the ugly realities about Iran. Well, we can't do that. We can't do that. You want us to say, you know, America and Israel are the villains, and they are, and Iran is the victim, and they are, in this situation. But that's not the whole story. Not at all. You know, people want to say that this so-called axis of resistance is righteous. They want to say that this axis of so-called resistance is noble, and anyone who says otherwise is a tool of imperialism. No, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. But you are living in a narrative hallucination. That's not analysis. That's not analysis. That's ideology. That's sectarianism. And it has cost hundreds of thousands of Muslim lives. So let me tell you about the blood that doesn't get counted in your narrative of the so-called noble resistance, the blood that's on Iran's hands. Let me tell you about the Muslims that Iran killed, because you ought to know. You ought to know and you ought to remember, because the region remembers. You understand me? The region remembers. And that's why your resistance narrative, so-called, doesn't resonate with anyone in the region. Because your so-called noble resistance fighters, in fact, in reality, operate exactly like colonizer auxiliaries, as far as anyone in the region is concerned. You ought to know this and understand it. So when you talk about how heroic they are, when you talk about how much you admire them and whatnot, all we hear is that you are a Western supremacist who hates the Muslims. That's what we hear when you say those things. And when we hear it from Muslims in the diaspora in the West, then we know you are completely disconnected from your ummah. I mean, let's start with Iraq. Start with Iraq. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, they created a vacuum. In fact, they insisted on creating a vacuum. That was their whole plan. They did everything possible to create a vacuum. And predictably, and it was predicted, Iran moved in fast to fill that vacuum. faster than anyone. They funded, they armed, they directed, they organized sectarian militia groups, death squads. Death squads is the more accurate term. And they spent years hunting Muslims in Iraq, not insurgents, not fighters, Muslims in Iraq. Whole neighborhoods in Baghdad were ethnically cleansed by those militias. Imams, scholars, politicians, tribal leaders, fathers, mothers, children, abducted, tortured, executed under Iran's direction. In 2007, Iraq's most prominent Muslim politician, Adnan ad-Dulaymi, he stood up in the parliament and he said, he called it for what it was. He said, what's happening in Iraq is an unprecedented genocidal campaign by Iranian-backed sectarian militias. That's what he called it. He called it a genocide campaign. He called it ethnic cleansing because that's what it was, ethnic cleansing. That's exactly what it was. Your Iran, your axis of resistance was behind that. Between 2014 and 2016, when Iran was trying to position themselves as the great defender of the Islamic world, an estimated 22,000 Iraqi Muslims were killed in sectarian violence by those same righteous axis of resistance sectarian militia killers. 22,000 in 2 years. The so-called Popular Mobilization Forces, the PMF, the Iranian-backed militias that were supposed to be fighting against ISIS, against Daesh, well, they were documented to have destroyed 345 civilian Muslim homes west of Mosul after retaking that area from ISIS. Investigators said that there was no apparent military necessity for doing that. The houses were gone because the Muslims lived there. That's why they did it, because that's where the Muslims were. Because they wanted them ethnically cleansed because they didn't belong to their sect. And those people, those poor people had already suffered under ISIS, the tyranny of ISIS. And then they get ethnically cleansed from their own place, from their own neighborhoods, when you came in supposedly to liberate them. You came in to liberate them from ISIS, and then you expelled them from their homes and murdered them. Because they wanted them ethnically cleansed, because they didn't belong to your sect. After they had already suffered under ISIS tyranny. I'm telling you, ISIS and PMF were just different brands of the same colonizer brutality. In Jurf al-Nasr, 3,000 Muslim homes were demolished. 7,000 Muslim families were displaced and were never allowed to return. Never, not until today, not allowed to return to their homes in their own country because Iranian-backed sectarian militias decided that that land belonged to them now. Tell me how that doesn't sound exactly like Zionists. Doesn't that sound exactly like Zionists? Remember, we're talking about armed groups. We're talking about militias that Iran created. They set them up, they funded them, they armed them, and they directed them. By 2022, Iraqi Muslims who were not from the Iranian sect, they represented 90% of all prisoners in illegal detention in Iraq. 90%. 9,000 of them were on death row. In the same year that Iran was trying to present themselves at international forums as the champion of the oppressed Muslims in the world, the champion of oppressed Muslims everywhere, and you fell for it. Meanwhile, they are oppressing Muslims. They're oppressing Muslims in Iraq, they're oppressing Muslims in Lebanon, in Syria, and inside of their own country, inside of Iran. In 2023, the Speaker of the Iraqi parliament confirmed that Iranian-backed militias had kidnapped and had executed thousands of Muslim men and boys between 2013 and 2017. Thousands kidnapped and executed. Okay, that's their record in Iraq within just the last 10 years or so. And it's a criminal record and it's horrific. But then you can also look at Syria. Okay, everyone knows in 2011 the Syrians rose up against Bashar al-Assad. And everyone understands what they were rising up for, why they were rising up, and everyone understands who was rising up. It was the Muslims who were rising up, ordinary people. People who had been living under a very brutal Alawi dictatorship for decades, a sectarian dictatorship, and they wanted dignity. They wanted freedom. They wanted what all human beings want and what all human beings deserve. And Iran looked at that uprising and they made a calculation. They said Bashar al-Assad has to survive. Not because Bashar al-Assad was good, not because the Syrian people didn't deserve better, didn't deserve their freedom, but because without Syria, their land corridor to Hezbollah collapses. Without Syria, Iran's regional empire loses its geographic spine. So they poured in. Iran poured in. They poured Hezbollah in from Lebanon, poured in sectarian militants from Iraq, sectarian Afghani fighters who were recruited under desperate circumstances and shipped to Syria. The IRGC itself was directing operations on the ground. Billions of dollars, upwards of $16 billion between 2012 and 2020, they spent to just keep that vicious dictator in power over people who were begging to be free from him and who had every right to be free from him. What happened in Aleppo? Do you even remember? Iran's generals were celebrating it as a strategic victory, while the whole world was horrified by the civilian casualties. Iran's senior military aide to their so-called supreme leader went on television bragging about the so-called liberation that they had achieved. That's the word he used, liberation. I'm asking, liberation for who? For who? For the Muslim civilians who were being killed in their homes? For the Muslim families that were being starved in the suburbs that were completely besieged? Do you know that the United Nations Commission of Inquiry documented indiscriminate bombing in Aleppo? Indiscriminate bombing in East Ghouta, a suburb of Damascus with 250,000 people. The forces of Bashar al-Assad, backed by Iran, backed by Hezbollah, laid siege until the people surrendered. They made them suffer until they surrendered, and more than 400,000 Syrians died in that war. Half the country was displaced. And the overwhelming majority of the dead, the overwhelming majority of the displaced, was Muslims, overwhelmingly. Iran didn't just fail to protect them. No, Iran was the one who killed them. Yes, they are. Iran's the one who killed them. And then you can look at Yemen. This is another one. This is another one that you all like to misrepresent when you talk about Iran. Yemen was already the poorest country in the whole Arab world. They were already fragile. They were already struggling. They were already suffering. And Iran took the Houthi sectarian movement that already existed. It was a homegrown political force. They had real grievances. I don't say that they didn't. They had real grievances, but they turned them into an instrument of Iranian regional power. Weapons, training, strategic direction, all flowing from Tehran. This marvelous axis of resistance. What was the result? A completely destroyed country, a humanitarian catastrophe, children dying of cholera, children dying of famine. Not as the side effect of someone else's war. We're talking about as the direct consequence of a conflict that Iran actively engineered, actively sustained, and actively prolonged because it served Iranian strategic interests to keep a war burning with Saudi Arabia and the UAE on their border, on the southern border of Saudi Arabia. Now I'm going to pause here because I know that you're going to be mad at me. I know you're going to be mad at me for saying all of this factual information. I know what you're going to say. I know what you want to say. But Iran supports Palestine. They support Gaza. The Houthis support Gaza. What are you talking about, Shahid? Yes, the Houthis have launched drones against Israel. Yes, they have. I don't say they didn't. They disrupted the shipping lanes in the Red Sea in support of Gaza. Yes, they did. They did that. They also massacred Muslims in Yemen. Iran supported Hamas. Yes, they did for a while when they were exclusively a fighting force. But they dropped Hamas the second that they became a government. And they dropped them when they refused to follow Iran's orders and go fight for Bashar al-Assad against the Muslims. They dropped them for that. And they did not support Hamas. They did not support Hamas and they did not support Gaza financially since almost 20 years ago. As I said before, Hezbollah, for example, that you all love, was not created for Palestine. It was created to try to gain control over Lebanon. And the Houthis were not supported because of any support that they had for Palestine. They were supported exclusively to gain control and to gain influence in Jazirat al-Arab. So let's be factual here. Let's tell the truth. Okay? Houthis launched attacks that impacted Israel. Hezbollah has done so as well. And also, both groups have slaughtered thousands upon thousands of Muslims. And furthermore, Hamas's unwillingness to slaughter other Muslims for the sake of Bashar al-Assad upon the orders of Iran, they got dropped by Iran over that. Look, Iranian posturing and even their actual acts against Israel that are just recent, that doesn't put 22,000 Iraqi Muslims back in their homes. That doesn't unkill all of the Syrians who were murdered by those Iranian militias, Iranian-backed militias. No, Iran has more Muslim blood on their hands than any country in the region that calls itself Muslim. That's not provocation. This is just accounting. This is just honest accounting, whether you like it or not. And here's what makes it worse. Iran built its entire political identity, its entire claim to global sympathy, Muslim sympathy, on the narrative of resistance, on the image that they're standing up against Zionism, standing up against imperialism and so forth, on the language of Islamic brotherhood and the language of Islamic solidarity and so on and so forth, while running death squads against Muslims in Baghdad, in Syria, in Lebanon, and in Yemen. Death squads. Okay, these two things cannot coexist in an honest analysis. You cannot present yourself as the defender of Muslim life while your proxies are ethnically cleansing Muslim neighborhoods by the thousands. No, I'm sorry, you cannot claim Islamic solidarity while pouring money and pouring weapons into a regime that is barrel bombing its own Muslim population. Yes, okay, the Gulf states get condemned, and sometimes fairly, criticized fairly sometimes for their involvement in Sudan, in Libya, in Yemen, and so forth. And those criticisms should be made when they can be made fairly, which you all almost never can do. But you should at least try to bring that same energetic criticism against Tehran for their decades upon decades of crimes against the Muslims. Because your selective outrage is not analysis, it's tribalism, it's sectarianism, and that's what got us here in the first place. And you understand, Iran's sectarian project that they were doing in Iraq, this didn't just kill Muslims directly. They weren't just killing Muslims directly with their militias. With the sectarian government in Iraq, there was marginalization, systematic marginalization and humiliation of the Muslims in Iraq if you didn't belong to that sect. And that created conditions in Iraq in which ISIS could grow. Their behavior created the fertile ground for radicalization, and that benefited Iran, and that benefited the United States of America, and that benefited Israel. That's the full picture. That's the full picture. That's the honest accounting. Inshallah, bi'idhnillah, we're trying to be honest and objective. We try to hold the full picture. We don't let anybody off the hook. We don't let America off the hook. We don't let Israel off the hook. We don't let Iran off the hook. This is a RICO case. This isn't just an individual indictment. So now we come to the part that almost nobody wants to talk about at all. I've talked about it before. America, Israel, and Iran have never been just simple black and white enemies. I've been saying this for years. I know what it sounds like when you first hear it, because you're so drunk on narrative. It sounds crazy to you. It sounds like I'm trying to undermine the so-called resistance that you believe is real. Because most people only know the narratives when you talk about Iran. When you talk about the Middle East generally, they don't know the realities that the narratives are designed to obscure. But look, the truth of the matter is that for the first decade of the so-called Islamic Republic, while Iran was publicly calling for the destruction of Israel, Iran was literally buying weapons from Israel. Buying weapons from Israel. That's not an allegation, you understand me? That's documented history, that's fact. Iran-Contra, look it up. The arms deals, the intelligence sharing that was going on quietly behind the scenes. It was going on quietly behind the scenes while their rhetoric was getting louder and louder. And I'm telling you, that's the pattern. You have to understand that pattern. The louder the rhetoric, the deeper the cooperation. That's how it has been since 1979. Hostility on the surface, underneath symbiosis. And the same thing is going on right now. Believe me, I guarantee you, the same thing is going on right now. Even while there's airstrikes going on and counter airstrikes going on. Not only are the United States and Iran going to be talking, they never stop talking. The truth is that the negotiations in Geneva never actually stopped because of the bombing. They've been ongoing this entire time. I guarantee you, they've been talking. So what's the reason for this symbiotic relationship? It's because they need each other. The Iranian hardliners need Israeli aggression to justify their own grip on power. They need the Zionist threat. How else do you explain the need for the IRGC in the first place without the Israeli enemy? How do you justify 50 years of so-called resistance that has delivered nothing but poverty, isolation, and perpetual crisis to your own people? How do you keep that justified? And for the Zionist hardliners, they need the Iranian threat. This is obvious. They need an existential threat. They need the existential Iranian menace. How else do you justify your militarism and your expansionism? How else do you justify the occupation? How else do you justify keeping your own population in a permanent state of fear and instability and make them accept things that they should never accept and brainwash them into things that they should never believe in? And how else do you justify becoming a non-stop funneling instrument for U.S. tax dollars into the military-industrial complex? No. These two factions are codependent. They legitimize each other. They sustain each other like Batman and Joker. They complete each other. They sustain each other, and both of them have been feeding off the bodies of ordinary Muslims for 50 years, in Israel's case for more than 50 years. So if you ask me who's responsible for the current war, knowing everything that I know about the region and about the history of the region, I will still tell you unequivocally that America and Israel are responsible for this war, absolutely. They're committing war crimes, as they are wont to do. But I'll also tell you that both Iran and Israel have failed to adapt to the changing regional and global order. And this failure to adapt has forced drastic measures to be taken to demolish the now obsolete hardliner paradigms upon which both regimes are existentially based. And I will tell you also that ultimately, America is responsible. America is responsible even ultimately, not just in the short term, but if you go back through history, America is responsible. They made Israel what it is, and they made Iran what it is, starting in 1953. But I want to be clear now. Just because both sides are guilty of atrocities, both sides are guilty of ethnic cleansing of the Muslims, 100%, this is true. But that does not mean that this current war is just. It's not. The US and Israel attack on Iran is completely illegal. It's disproportionate and it's murderous. We've said that, and we mean that. The fact that Iran has also done terrible things in the region does not give America and it does not give Israel the right to start a war. And yet, and this is where I think you need to try to think carefully. This is where we get into the geopolitics of it all. The two hardliner problems cannot be solved separately. They cannot be solved separately. The IRGC hardliners and the Zionist hardliners are just two sides of the same coin. I know that the pro-Iranians don't want to hear this, but it's true. This is like an explosive that has two wires to diffuse it. They both have to be cut, and they have to be cut simultaneously, or at least in quick succession. And the Iranian wire has to be cut first. Why does it have to be cut first? I think the reason should be obvious. If Israel is defanged first and integrated first into the region, normalized first into the region, and hardline Zionists are subdued, but Iran remains antagonistic, and they still have their proxies intact, Iran could and would cause problems. They would antagonize, they would provoke, and so forth. They would try to undermine the peace and the reconstruction that was underway, the normalization, the integration, and so forth, because their existential model relies upon conflict, just like Israel's does. And then, if they were to provoke anything, that would force the entire region to take sides with Israel against Iran, which nobody wants to do. Nobody wants to do that. Because also, if you do that, that would undermine any post-conflict relationship with Iran and normalization of ties with Iran. And that would hinder Iran's integration into the region. But if you degrade the hardliners in Iran via conflict with Israel, you also get degradation of Israel at the same time. Hardliners taking out the hardliners, you understand? And this facilitates the integration and the normalization of both Iran and Israel, because both of them will be weakened, both of them will be compromised, both of them will be subordinated, and both of them, inshallah, bi'idhnillah, by that time, will both be headed by pragmatists post-war. They have to come down together. They must come down together, or neither is going to come down at all. Or anyway, that's the calculation of the region. That's the calculation that the region has made. And it seems that that's the calculation that the A-National OCGFC have made. Understand this, the entire political argument for Zionist militarism, the argument that keeps it alive, that gives it international cover, the argument that allows Netanyahu to do what he does, rests entirely on the Iranian threat. You remove the Iranian threat, that argument collapses. An Iran that is economically integrated with its neighbors, with the region, an Iran that has dismantled its proxy networks completely, an Iran that is participating in regional development rather than regional destabilization, which is what they've been doing for over 40 years. That Iran makes the whole Zionist project's central justification visible for what it is, which is, it's not defense, that's a lie, it's colonial expansion. Defanging one defangs the other automatically. And at that point, Israelis themselves will start to see things differently, because you can't keep telling people that they're in danger when the supposed danger has become your trading partner. You understand me? So the removal of Iranian hardliners facilitates the conditions for the removal of Zionist hardliners. That's not a preference. That's just the logic of the regional system, the logic of the relationships that have been built over the last 50 years, the dynamics that have been built over the last 50 years. And here's something else, something that requires real unemotional intellectual honesty to talk about. The current war, as criminal as it is, as devastating as it is, as wrong as it is accelerating the transformation that the region has needed for a long time and has been working towards for a long time. Not because this war is any good. It's never good. War is never good. People are dying. Children are dying. That's never good. I'm not justifying it in any way. And I don't think, as I've said before, I don't think anyone wanted things to go this way. I didn't think they wanted it to be done this way. I mean, okay, Netanyahu wanted it. Lindsey Graham maybe. But I'm talking about people who are actually in a position to manage the regional transition. Netanyahu isn't in that position. Lindsey Graham certainly isn't in that position. Neither one of those two people are in that position. The people who are in that position, I don't think anyone wanted it to go this way. And inside Iran, the pragmatists, like Pezeshkian, like Araghchi and others, they've been trying to steer the regime in the direction of integration and in the direction of pragmatism. But the IRGC, here's the problem, is not just an ideological force. The IRGC is a domestic, economic, and industrial empire inside of Iran. And they're fighting for that as much as they're fighting for anything else. They haven't just blocked the Strait of Hormuz. They have blocked the whole regional transition and the whole regional transformation. And they have blocked the stabilization, and they've blocked the progress, and they've blocked the prosperity of Iran. Yes, they have. And their intransigence, their refusal to loosen their grip over the industrial interests that they hold in Iran, that brought everything to a halt. And now they're fighting an existential battle to keep control. And that's one of the reasons why no one wanted it to come to this, because you could see this coming. No, I don't believe that that everything that we're seeing now is orchestrated. I do not. Everything that we're seeing now is not orchestrated. Not at this point. I don't think it's even possible for it to be that coordinated when you're talking about the IRGC. They're not centralized enough for it to be that coordinated, in my opinion. So they're fighting for their position. They're fighting for their position. They're fighting for their control. They're for their dominance and their interests. Just like Netanyahu. Just like Netanyahu and the lunatics who are around him. Khamenei got taken out, yes, and his son got installed, but that remains to be seen if his son is going to last. We'll see. Now there's rumors that Netanyahu might already be in Jahannam, which would literally mean the hardliners taking out the hardliners, very literally. Because in my opinion, Benjamin Netanyahu has not been cooperating with the regional transition. I don't see any evidence of that. I think that his predictable mad dog behavior and his delusion that we're still in the 1990s, I think that's just been manipulated. I think he probably did make a deal for his political exit. And I think that that deal probably depended upon him getting a pardon for his corruption charges. In which case, Herzog refusing to pardon him, which is something that Trump has been begging him to do, refusing to pardon him might potentially constitute a death sentence for Netanyahu, because he has to go either way. One way or the other, Netanyahu has to go. Now, obviously, the rumors that our earth has been relieved of his presence may not be true. Time will tell. I mean, any number of things could be happening during his absence from the public eye, so we'll have to wait and see. But either way, he is reaching the end of the a-national and the regional patience, if he hasn't already exceeded it. I mean, I could talk about a number of things that might happen with regards to escalation and with regards to politicking and diplomacy and so forth. But in my opinion, I haven't seen anything that alters the trajectory of the region. Not so far. Not so far. So I'd rather not get into any contingency scenarios and speculation. The point is, as I've said many times, the world is going through a transition. The old world order, the post-World War II order of American dominance, of Western epistemological supremacy, the so-called rules-based order that was always nothing but rules for them to make and rules for us to obey, well, that order is collapsing. That world order is collapsing. The current conflict is occurring within this context, and has to be understood within this context. This transition is giving Muslim-majority countries opportunities that have not existed for us in centuries. Opportunities to define our future, to build our own institutions, to stop outsourcing our political analysis and political understandings to the frameworks of the very powers that colonized us. We don't have to do that anymore. Alhamdulillah, we don't have to do that anymore. But all of these opportunities that we're facing, that we have before us, they can get squandered and they can get buried every time we choose a faction over the truth. We have to tell the truth. And we can't be binary in our thinking. Binary thinking is always dishonest. By nature, it's always dishonest, and it's always some form of narrative peddling. So what's happening in Iran now is wrong, no question about it. And I've said that many times. It's a crime. What the Americans are doing, what the Israelis are doing to Iran is wrong, it's criminal. They should be punished for that. But that fact does not make the Iranian regime or the IRGC or their proxies innocent. And it does not make them heroes. The guilty can be wronged, and even the wronged can be guilty. You understand me? We don't need you to be pure, we don't need you to be wonderful, and we don't need you to be heroic in order for us to condemn it when wrong is done to you, and wrong is being done to Iran. And when we tell you the truth about the wrongs that Iran has committed, we are not justifying wrong being done to Iran. And we're also not in any way whatsoever, denying or minimizing, subhanAllah, the vast wrongs committed by the U.S. and committed by Israel. Israel itself is a wrong that the U.S. committed. I said this is a RICO case. There's a lot of co-conspirators. There's a lot of guilty parties in this scenario. Again, this is not binary. Iran has been a bad actor. Israel has been nothing but a bad actor. The United States of America has not only been a bad actor, they've been a whole bad movie. They've been a bad actor, a bad cast, a bad director, a bad script, a bad soundtrack, a bad marketing campaign. But even from the bad, alhamdulillah, Allah can make good come out of it. And inshallah, bi'idhnillah, the hardliners are all going to be subdued. They're all going to be subdued. They're all going to be eliminated or otherwise banished from the region. Inshallah, bi'idhnillah, once this is all over. The Iranian hardliners, the Israeli hardliners, and the neocon American hardliners will all be gone from the region, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. And we will be able to proceed with the transition towards regional collective sovereignty.
Yeah, the very sad state of affairs for Iran, and this has actually spread throughout the countries in the world, and especially for those countries that rely on Iran for, like fuel. And you also know that fuel in an economy is everything. It's the one thing that runs about everything. Once you do not have fuel, then it means automatically that you're going to be short on many other important things. And what Shahid Bolsen wants to put across is that he thinks, in as much as we are going to talk about all the things, I am sure you have seen what is being said on news about Iran, and everyone looks as though they are blaming Iran for whatever is happening. But no one is giving thought to what or how much Iran has been hurt before, and for them to even get to that point, they must have endured quite a lot. And this is according to Bolsen and the interview that you've watched. I don't know what you people think about this, but all that I am actually worried about is for how long is this thing going to be on, because it's affecting everyone. It's actually affecting everyone, be it the countries that are at war with each other, or even the neighboring countries. Everyone that relies on fuel coming from that side of the world is affected, and affected badly. So all we can do is hope that this thing comes to a halt and things change and things become better for everyone, like we just go back to normalcy and solve whatever issues that we have. And yeah, I know, guys, you have thoughts, and I know I'm also open to the fact that most of you might not agree with what Shahid Bolsen is saying. And I know there are some of you that are on that side, and you think that whatever he is trying to put across is also something that needs to be considered as a cause, or, if it is to be solved, then they have to consider what he is saying. All of those people, whether you are on his side or not, you are free to share your comments in the comment section below. Let us learn from how you think. I would like to understand how you're coming up with whatever ideologies you have, and the information that you have, sharing will help, especially those that do not even have a stand on what they think about whatever is happening to Iran. They might learn from you people, and just be informed. It's important to be informed, to know how the world is running and to know the things that are affecting the current world that we live in, because you need to know, because you are also part of this. Now, guys, I know that I have new subscribers, lots and lots of them. Thank you so much for choosing to be on my channel and making this your little home. You're most welcome. For returning subscribers, thank you so much for always being here, encouraging me, making me feel a little better about things, and giving me the morale and the energy to keep making these videos. Sometimes it's draining, sometimes it's just a lot, but once I know that I have an audience that loves to interact with my content, then it makes it a little bit easier to just free up some time and make these videos for you. So I'm gladly doing this. I am not struggling. I'm gladly doing it. And if you've not subscribed to my channel, kindly consider subscribing, because I said in my previous video that I have noticed most of you people, like 98% of you, have not subscribed to my channel. You're watching videos, but you have not subscribed. So kindly, if you're one of those, make sure to subscribe. And if you like this video and this kind of videos, this can actually be the best place for you to be. You can consider sharing the video to your family, friends, people that are like-minded, people that want to know how the world is moving and to what direction and why. Yeah, also give this video a thumbs up if you like it. And yeah, enough for now. I think I will see you guys on my next video, and I hope that you take care of yourself, love yourself a little bit more, and I love you from where I am. So thank you. I hope to see you on my next one. Bye.